This slide will, or this, excuse me, this PowerPoint is going to be about labels. So what we're going to talk about is what a label is, what a requisition form is, and what to look for, what should be on them, and things of that nature. So anytime we go to collect blood, the procedure is always gonna begin with a request for a test from the physician, all right, or their physician assistant, nurse practitioner, whoever it may be that can order the blood draw. That is what is going to start this whole process of the collection procedure. For outpatients, the laboratory processes the physician's request and generates what we call a requisition, which is a set of labels for the collection tubes, or sometimes you'll get both. Generally, procedures for inpatients arrive at the laboratory through a computer system, and there won't be a paper requisition that's generated. You'll see what I mean in a slide or two, the difference between computer printed label and a requisition, which is a paper form that's filled out. So typically, once again, inpatient, meaning at a hospital, place like that, and even those outpatient labs, a lot of times nowadays, you're going to see the labels are just printed. So these requisitions and labels should have the following information on them, okay? So once again, the requisitions and labels are basically one and the same. They should have the patient's demographics, which means they should have their full name, their date of birth, sex, and race. If they're inpatient, hospital ID number, room, and bed number should also be on there. So once again, if they're inpatient, meaning they're in a hospital, or it's a place they are staying at, those things should be on there. There should be a name or code of the physician making the request so they know who's requesting this. And then the test status, meaning it needs to be stat, they're fasting, if there's a certain time for it, so the status of the test. All these things have to be present on the requisition of the labels. The number and type of tubes to collect may also be indicated on these. Test names may be abbreviated, so it's important that we know the meaning of test abbreviations. That's something we'll learn. It takes a little bit of experience and time, and we'll help you with that, especially once we get to lab. It sort of starts here with lecture, and we're going to build off that a little bit. The information provided on the requisition of the labels serves as several purposes. First, it allows us to identify the patient correctly, and it will also help us provide some helpful information about the patient. Secondly, it tells us what specimens should be collected. Lastly, it also allows us to gather information and equipment for the collection before we encounter the patient. So we already know what tubes we need and things of that nature. So there's a few things that this really helps with. However, it may not tell us any special handling procedures, so it's important that we check with what tests are doing and make sure we understand if it has to be handled a specific way. So here's the difference between a computer printed label and a requisition. All right. Once again, they're going to have they're basically one and the same. They have all the same information. They just look a little different. So on the left here, you see the computer printed label. All right. You see a barcode on there, should have their name, first and last, their date of birth, the physician name or code, their sex, their race, if they're inpatient, also the room number and hospital name as well, like we talked about. All right. Same thing's going to be on the requisition. It's just a little bit different. It's a big piece of paper. All the top part of this, you'll see there's sort of blank spots. That's going to be all those identifiers for the patient. And below are all the different tests that can be run from blood collection. So anything that needs to be run will be checked on there. So those are the two, that's the difference between a computer printed label and a requisition, just so you can physically see that. Most places nowadays use the computer printed labels. However, there are still places that are using these requisitions. So it's important to know what they both look like and the information that's supposed to be on them. When you see a requisition or receive a computer printed label, whichever one you get, first, you want to examine and make sure that it has all the necessary information. Once again, it has that full name, date of birth, ordering physician, and patient location. We check for any duplicates, check how many requisitions or labels there are for one patient. Make sure we group them together so we can do the collection all with one single puncture. meaning that we can just draw their blood once and collect all the different tubes we need. We don't have to go back and poke them again and again and again. So let's do as much as we can at once. It's easier for us, and it's a lot easier for our patient. Make sure we're prioritizing the requisitions or labels, meaning that if something says stat means immediately. That needs to be done immediately, needs to be run immediately. Some are time collection where it's a specific time that it needs to be drawn. Others are routine where it doesn't quite really matter as much as far as prioritizing. Before you start, obviously you want to make sure you collect all the equipment you need for the collection that you will be performing. Regardless of the method for submitting a lab test request, once again, all those things we just talked about, I'm not going to go over them again. I'm going to make it quick and painless for you here. All the things we just talked about, those need to be on there. I can't highlight that enough. And you're checking it every single time when you go. The one thing that I want to add on there is we need to make sure we're putting the time and date of the specimen collection if it's not already on the printed labels. All right, the time and the date that we actually collected. We drew their blood. What was the time and what was the date? So when we go to label the tubes, we're going to label each tube at the patient's bedside or in the drawing room in the presence of the outpatient. So we will not leave the room without first labeling the tubes. All right, so you can see on the picture over here to the right, this is how you're going to label the tubes. All right, so it's going to go from one end of the label is going to be close to the tube cap, and then the other end is going to be close to the end of the tube. All right, you want to make sure it's on there nice and smooth. It's not crumpled up or wrinkled or overlapping. If you're labeling by hand, you're going to either use a ballpoint pen or a permanent marker. Never use a pencil or non-permanent marker. The label must have all that information we talked about. Once again, almost everybody nowadays uses these computer printed labels like you see in this picture. However, in case they don't, never to use a pencil or non-permanent marker. This is so nobody can change any of that information. If you are using computer generated labels, make sure that all the information is on there, and never label a tube before you collect the blood. All right, this can lead to serious errors. You can accidentally collect it from somebody else and you already have a label for a different patient. It can lead to a lot of different errors. So you never label the tube until after the blood's collected, and you always label it in front of the patient. Anything that requires special handling, such as warming or exclusion from light, should be placed in the proper container immediately after. So these are the important things when it comes to labels and requisitions and how we label.